Good evening and welcome to another episode of Rich Politics with me, your host, Richard Taylor. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media platforms and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Well, what a weekend it was. I joined with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people as we gathered on the streets of London, bringing it to a standstill to demand that our freedoms be restored and the government no longer put us into any form of lockdown or restrictions any further. The people of the country have had enough, especially when politicians are full of hypocrisy, becoming the law makers and law breakers. Not just Matt Hancock, but here in Wales, we've seen it with politicians also, with still ongoing investigations in the booze up down in Cardiff Bay in the Welsh Parliament. And so, of course, the march was about freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from the government's interference into our everyday lives. This nanny state that they've created, a two-tiered system. And of course, now we've got the jabbed and the unjabbed, showing preferential treatment to those who've had the jab. By the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Some of my children have been vaccinated by choice. I'm pro-choice. And of course, many on the march were there because they believed that their freedoms had been taken away. Yet left-wing propaganda media outlets such as The Guardian, they called it a anti-vaxxer demonstration. They couldn't be so wrong. What a load of tripe. Well, I was joined with tens of thousands of people, and I've said with Lawrence Fox from Reclaim Party as well, but I also met with somebody called Matthew Stevens, who I'm going to speak to tonight. Matthew Stevens, welcome to Rich Politics.
Hello, how are you? All good?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much for calling. Matthew, you were at the march yesterday, yesterday. I've forgotten which day you're on now. We were at the march on Saturday. I walked with you. You were with us at the front. It was an amazing occasion. Tell us your thoughts, what you thought about the march.
Absolutely. So as you say, I was with you. I mean, I was supposed to be doing some reporting for Reform UK, but unfortunately me and Martin had technical issues, so we never managed to do that. But the protest was absolutely phenomenal. There were more people than I was expecting. It was a phenomenal atmosphere. It was like being at a festival. It was just fantastic. There was music. And the thing is, there are people from all over the place. There weren't just, as the press would have you know, there weren't just lunatics there. There's a small minority of people with viewpoints I don't necessarily agree with. But the absolute majority of people were there because they're just fed up with these restrictions. They're normal people with normal jobs. There were families with children there. I mean, it was just fantastic.
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of families, you see, and children there as well. And we saw The Guardian and other left-wing propaganda, news outlets out there calling this an anti-vax kind of march, which is simply it wasn't that, was it?
Absolutely not. I read the article too, and it said anti-vax protests sees 3 arrests. I mean, just ludicrous. It wasn't an anti-vax protest. I probably saw, 2 or 3% of people there were anti-vax, had anti-vax signs up. We're going along with that sort of thing. It just wasn't the case. I've seen it watching Sky News recently, and they've mentioned it on their broadcast, anti-vax protest, which it just wasn't. It was an anti-lockdown protest. People are just fed up with these restrictions continuing any longer. It definitely wasn't an anti-vax protest. Otherwise, I wouldn't have attended.
Yeah, of course. Some of the criticism that's been leveled at me personally on social media and others as well is that, people were saying, well, you're complaining about having your freedoms taken away, but you've got the freedom to march. So what are you marching for? What's the point? What would you say to them?
Well, firstly, I'm glad we got the freedom to march. But what I would say is the organisers for the event were threatened to be arrested, which tells you that we necessarily haven't got the freedom to march because the organisers were, threatened with arrest, which tells you the freedom to march is probably not quite there. I'd also say that, people say it's, you're free, you can do as you wish, and the restrictions have already been eased. What I'd say to you is, I'm not a selfish person. I'm not doing this for me. I'm very comfortable in life. My life's perfect. I've not got any problems, you see. But what I'm doing this for is the businesses like the pub industry, which are going to lose £400 million over this 4-week delay period. That's who I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for businesses like that, people who can't afford to live with this delay.
Yeah, I think you're right. And of course, these restrictions are still in place. We're not completely free because Freedom Day was delayed by 4 weeks. And of course, the government now is talking about potentially here in Wales, certainly a third wave, preparing the NHS. The winter months are coming. And I think people have lost confidence in the government when they promised they're going to lift everything on the 19th of July. And now the change of health secretary, because Hancock had his end away with his aid. Suddenly, people are waking up to the hypocrisy that, it's one rule for them and another one for us. And I think the public display of anger and frustration was very palpable at the march that I certainly witnessed and saw. And it was a peaceful demonstration, as you rightly say. To those people who say, why are you marching? What's the point? You've got freedom. You can go to a pub, go to a cafe. Well, I just like to remind them that you can go to a wedding, but you can't dance. You can go to a football match, but can't sing. There are still restrictions that don't make any sense. Now, what this march was about wasn't just about the here and now, Matthew. It was about the future, that we're saying to the government, aren't we, that we no longer will accept these draconian measures in the future because we've had enough, because of the impact that it's having. And you've witnessed it. You're a young man and you're involved in politics. Now, from your perspective, do you think that the marches like this have any effect on government policy and thinking in the future?
So, as you say, a lot of it was for here now, but also it's for the future, because in the winter months, Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson have been softening us up for a further full lockdown. We talked, Matt Hancock was on Times Radio the other day talking about how the flu is going to badly affect us this year and potentially how there have to be measures in place for that, which are just ludicrous. And that's what part of the protest was for. And when there's sort of a couple of 100,000 people, if not more, I don't know the exact numbers, but it looked like there was 200, maybe more thousand. When there's 200,000 people or so marching through the streets of London, it's hard to ignore, isn't it? You can't ignore 200,000 people walking down the streets of London. That's what I'd say. So it definitely made a difference. And things, when you have protests at that large scale, of course it makes a difference. Of course they can't ignore it.
Of course, and as we're speaking now, some footage is coming up on the screen here so folks can see some of the footage, thankfully, that Richard Tice was able and Dr. David Bowe was able to get for us as we're speaking here. It was interesting as well that the mainstream media from BBC, ITV and Sky News, the regular broadcasters, they didn't give much airtime to it. If anything, they give nothing to it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think their point of view, certainly, I think Dan Wootton mentioned this to you on GB News. Their point of view is these protests are a risk to public health because, I don't know what their viewpoint is on that, but they think they're a risk to public health because of the message that, everyone's putting across, which couldn't be further from the truth when you have 80% of adults vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, it comes a point where herd immunity, which is something they talked about at the beginning, and of course the WHO now are recommending that mask wearing and social distancing should remain in place even for those who have been vaccinated. I mean, the rules and the kind of scientific and data and all the stuff that they compile together to make decisions seems to be changing, constantly. So there is no real sense of there's a way out. I mean,
the goalposts have moved out the stadium, haven't they? The goalposts have moved from one end of the pitch all the way out. They're in the car park now, aren't they? They're moving towards the sea outside the stadium. I mean, it really, the goalposts keep moving, as you say. We've got these silly sage advisors constantly on TV trying to get a bit of airtime, trying to get some followers, saying we're going to have to carry on with social distancing forever. I mean, it's just ludicrous. If they want to socially distance because they've got no friends, if they want to sit at home on their own, that's fine. But let people live. Let us live. Enough is enough.
Yeah, I think that whole thing, that phrase "enough is enough" became a hashtag, of course, on social media and Twitter particularly. And I think people are realizing certainly that, it's around that time as well, just towards the end of the match, I went to the Bag of Nails in Victoria for a couple of pints to watch Wales get knocked out of the Euros, as you know. And I left you on the bus and had a 3-hour trip home. And whilst I was on there, I was thinking about, this phrase, enough is enough. People have literally said, look, we won't put up with this any longer. And right towards the end of the evening, the news broke of Matt Hancock resigning, if you remember.
Yes, I got that on the way
footage.
Home.
And it was literally just towards the end of the match. And I think the public anger towards politicians is not so much, for me personally, look, I don't have an issue with what someone does in their private life. That's me personally. If you want to do A, B, and C, that's your business. It's not my business. It's your business. But when you make the law and you break the law that you've imposed upon people, and when people couldn't hold the hands of their dying relatives in a hospital, at that point when you made a law to say they couldn't and you were getting your leg over, it's obvious to me why people would be so angry, isn't it, Matt?
Absolutely. I mean, we were joined by Emma Webb on Saturday, the journalist, and she put a quite striking post on her Twitter a few days ago. It was a photo of her trying to communicate with her grandmother through a window at a care home because they couldn't make contact. And then she put to the side of that Matt Hancock on May the 6th, having that incident in his office. And as you say, I don't think it'd be much of an issue if it was just a normal year and Matt Hancock had that, he would have come out, issued an apology, people would have laughed about it and moved on. But when he's making laws that we can't have contact with anybody outside of our household, can't hold the hands of our dying relatives, more than 30 people can't attend a funeral, you've got an issue if you're making laws about that and then you're pictured doing that. And that's why
as you're speaking, I'm just going to show folks there's an image of us. We had a photo outside the Shakespeare pub, and Julie Hadley Brewer from LBC Radio was with us. And the guy that came out from the pub got incensed. He was really angry because people were standing up, and the rules are you've got to sit down. Now, it's not the pub's fault, and I get that. No. It's not the guy working there because he's got a tough job, of course.
Absolutely.
But these are some of the stupid policies. It's like COVID, sits down and stands up. It doesn't make any sense. Yet, we're surrounded by 100,000 people on a march, and funnily enough, I've got a testing kit here at home, and I think later on this evening I'm going to run the test, and I guarantee you I'll come back negative. But anyway, that's just my thought. And I was surrounded by tens of thousands of people yesterday, mixing a million, mask free and everything else. And I think it was clear as well, there was a real sense of joy. It wasn't just about anger and frustration. People,
absolutely,
it was almost like a Glastonbury festival. People felt like a little bit of normality had come back. In fact, at one point, there was a rave on the back of a flatbed truck, if you remember. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Martin went and sort of stayed with him for a while, didn't he, joining him there? Yeah, no, I saw that. It was great fun.
He most certainly did. And I think, by and large, most people behaved themselves. There was one or two idiots, as you would expect, because that happens in a lot of these things. But all in all, it was a peaceful protest. Now, the question I want to finish on this quick chat with you tonight, Matt, is do you think that these demonstrations will continue? And if so, will they become more aggressive? No, I don't advocate, and I would always say no to violence. But could you understand people, the frustration and anger that they would feel if the government were to impose another lockdown upon us as a people?
So, firstly, as you correctly said, I'd never, ever, ever see violence as a resort to go to. And I think if people were to join a violent protest, it would lose its legitimacy, and people would ignore it, and there'd be bad things written about them. And actually, I think more people would then be in favour of a lockdown. They go, look at those lunatics, they're being violent. The government are right. And actually, I think you'd see more people backing another lockdown as opposed to if they weren't violent and didn't go along and do that. So I think if there is another lockdown, which is, I think, 7 out of 10 possibility, I think there will be a lot of public anger. And I think there won't be another protest, in my opinion, as long as all restrictions are eased on the 19th of July and there's no further lockdown. But if there's another delay, or God forbid, another lockdown, I think you will see 1 million people marching in London peacefully. Yeah. I think that's what will happen. Next November, he decides we're going to have another lockdown. I genuinely believe you'll see 1 million people.
And I will certainly
through the streets of London.
And I was going to say, and I'll certainly be one of those alongside you, as joining you.
Yeah.
One of the other things as well, and I was asked by Dan Wootton on GB News this question. Really, he said, "Well, look, majority of people, as shown in polls, support lockdowns and want more lockdowns." Why do you think that is? Given the current public mood that I've experienced, why do you think the polls are showing that?
So you make a very interesting point. The polls do sort of show a 35-60 majority for lockdown, but the questions are very interesting. The questions are very often, in order to stop cases rising and stop deaths rising, do you support the current measures? And it's like, hang on a minute, cases might rise, but deaths aren't going to rise. Of course, anybody to stop a number of deaths from rising are going to back measures. Anybody with the right mind who says there's going to be a lot of deaths would support some sort of measures. So the questions are very, very, very wrong in that sense. They're not, do you support the current measures? Yes or no? Do you support the current measures to stop a further amount of deaths? So that's why I think the polls are so lopsided, if that makes sense.
Certainly. I think the mainstream media have got a part to play in scaremongering as well. I think there's
100%.
been they've over, when they were reporting the figures, when we go back, over 15 months now, when we go back to the early stages of the pandemic, it was an epidemic, then a pandemic. I recall in the small print that people that had died with COVID within 28 days of having it, and the figures were inflated. And I just felt that they still are, certainly. And it was pretty. Now, we know COVID's real. Look, I've got loved ones, friends who've lost parents to COVID, who've died from COVID, not with COVID. Absolutely. So it's real. So we're not saying it's not real.
No, of course not.
We all know with any virus, we have to learn to live with it. And when we were promised by the government that this vaccine would be the exit strategy, I remember Matt Hancock with his beaming smiley face even cried on Good Morning Britain with an interview with Piers Morgan with tears down his face saying, "We found a vaccine. This is the way out." And this was back in December. And here we are 7 months or so on, and still living with restrictions, with over 85% of the population are vaccinated and at least half the population have been single jabbed, as they call it. So I'm interested to know what is in politicians' mind, because the Conservative Party, certainly the backbenchers, are now calling for the government to make sure that from the 19th of July, there will be no further restrictions. In the word of Boris Johnson himself, there is no going back. It's irreversible. But do people really trust this government right now, Matthew?
No, absolutely not. Especially people my age, they don't trust the government one bit, and not one bit. I mean, every young person I know is adamant we'll be in another lockdown. You know, adamant July 19th won't happen. Now, I'm actually of the belief that July 19th will happen, especially with the change of health secretary. I'm not concerned about that not happening now. Over the last few days and few weeks, you know, Rishi Sunak's come out quite strongly and said, look, if it doesn't happen, I'm going to kick up a fuss, sort of thing. You know, I don't know if you saw that. And Sajid Javid has said there is no going back. My priority is to end things on the 19th of July. So it's, you know, about a future lockdown. And I don't think people trust the government on that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, it was clear to me that people obviously have this distrust, and it wasn't. I noticed as well there were people at the protest. There was a protest actually that took place on Sunday as well, wasn't there, for the freedom to dance? If you saw that, I mean, it looked absolutely fantastic. I wish I'd stayed over on the Saturday night and danced with them.
I would have. If I'd known that was happening, I would have stayed over and joined in.
But the prices of hotels compared to the hotels in Wales are completely different. So I thought I'd go home instead, to be honest with you. Hey, Matthew, listen, it's been wonderful having you on. I hope to get you on again. And just tell us what you're doing at the moment, and what are you doing? What's the hopes for? What's Matthew going to be doing in the future? What would you like to be doing in the future?
Well, I'd like to be an MP one day, or just making a difference where it matters most. That's my one aim in life, you know. You know, at the moment I'm at college and I've been helping out with the Reform UK, Richard Tice. I was with him all the way through the London elections every day, sort of helping out there, and recent by-elections. I'm going to be staying involved with media projects. Dr. David Broad's been fantastic as well. So I've been staying involved there, and we just got to see where the future takes us. Hopefully one day, you know, I can be an elected politician or just someone that can make a difference.
Matthew, that's wonderful. You know, we need more young people like you who've got their heads screwed on and speak common sense. And thank you for coming on Rich Politics tonight. And I enjoyed being with you on the match on the weekend. It was wonderful. And my feet were sore, as you know. I was walking in shoes. It was wonderful. And I hope to get you back on another episode very, very soon.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.